So, Siddhartha Gautama, the man who would become the Buddha, had been meditating under the Bodhi tree for 49 days, 49 nights, when Mara, the demon prince, the one who delights in destruction, realized that Siddhartha was on the verge of achieving enlightenment, and this Mara could not abide nor allow. So first, he sent his 3 beautiful daughters named Thirst, Discontentment, and Desire to tempt the Buddha. But the Buddha was unmoved by their seductions. Then Mara called forth his army of 1,000 demons to threaten the Buddha. But when they unleashed their weapons against him, he sat unperturbed at the base of the Bodhi tree, and their javelins turned into lotus flowers before they reached him, falling harmlessly at the Buddha's feet. Finally, the demon Mara unleashed his final and perhaps his most powerful weapon, self-doubt. "Who are you to do this?" he demanded. "On whose authority do you claim enlightenment?" And at that moment, the Buddha touched his hand to the earth and said, "The earth is my witness." The earth sang its assent, and Mara left in defeat. That night, meditating under the tree, the Buddha achieved enlightenment. The earth is my witness. Statues and images of the Buddha often reference this moment in the struggle with the demon Mara. If you see a statue of the Buddha, you'll see often one hand held palm up in this kind of classic Buddha meditating pose. The other hand is pointing down, a finger touching the earth. So look for it the next time you see an image of the Buddha. And Mara is interpreted variously in the Buddhist tradition as a real figure, straight up demon, as a cosmic force, and or as a symbol of the internal obstacles to enlightenment that we all face, the workings of our own ego that block progress towards happiness or contentment, understanding. So in his path to enlightenment, the Buddha must move through the obstacles of desire and fear and unworthiness. The demon Mara, realizing that the Buddha is at the threshold of the doorway to enlightenment, about to step through, marshals all of these weapons to block him. And so in the story, Mara plays the role of the threshold guardian. So Buddhist philosopher and environmental activist Joanna Macy, in her book Act of Hope, tells about threshold guardians. This is a concept identified by Joseph Campbell, the great scholar and historian of mythology. In the timeless world of mythology, when the hero sets out on their journey, they always encounter a creature or obstacle that is blocking the path at key moments. This is the threshold guardian. You see this figure again and again in Greek mythology, for example. Before Oedipus could enter Thebes, he had to solve the riddle of the Sphinx. Before Theseus could escape the labyrinth, he had to defeat the Minotaur. Before Odysseus could return home, he had to outwit the Cyclops, who was trapping him and his men in his lair, right? These are the threshold guardians. And in each case, in order to continue onward in the journey, the hero must marshal their resources to overcome the obstacle. And Joanna Macy writes, "Adventure tales have been told for thousands of years, not just for their entertainment value, but also because they pass on teachings that help us to rise to challenges. Almost always," she says, "the protagonists find their way through by drawing on the fellowship of allies, by serving a purpose much bigger than themselves, by discovering strengths previously hidden from their own view, and by having enough humility to learn from others." And she concludes, usually some mysterious other force lends a hand. It could be a spiritual presence, it could be the moral force of a value like justice, or the emergent power of an interconnected web of life. And today, right now, we are, all of us, at the beginning of a great adventure story, a hero's journey into the unknown that we are on, and the stakes could not be higher. It is literally the fate of the world. Last month, the end of March, the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, the IPCC, released its latest report on the state of climate change. And the news is not good. Scientists report that we still have a window of opportunity to limit climate change to the 1.5 degrees Celsius target. That's the good news. We still have a window of opportunity. The bad news is the window is small, and it is disappearing fast. It is closing. We have until the end of this decade, scientists estimate, to make the sweeping changes we need to make the target. After that, we will blow right through the 1.5 degree limit. And with that, there will be consequences: natural disasters, drought, disease, habitat destruction, species extinction, forced migration. But even then, we can still act responsibly to limit the future damage, right? Even if we blow through that target, we can still keep climate change within survivable bounds. And that's what we're talking about, survival. The New York Times calls the task at hand, though, daunting. The people of the world must vastly reduce carbon emissions by 2030 and eliminate them altogether by 2050. And we are currently not on track to do that. Still, the Times reports, the report contains glimmers of optimism. Over the past decade, many nations have adopted ambitious climate policies. They have scaled back plans for new coal plants, and they've used subsidies to expand renewable energy. The Times says, although emissions from fossil fuels are growing worldwide, they are slowing. The rate of growth slowed in 2010s compared with the 2000s. They conclude, humanity now has a much better shot at avoiding some of the worst-case global warming scenarios. But immediate, robust action is needed. We need to move away from coal and natural gas. We need to reconfigure our transportation, our industrial systems to run on clean electricity. And we need to reduce our overall consumption of energy. And this will require big investments, political will, concerted action, and significant changes in our communities and in our individual lifestyles. So all of us will need to be a part of this solution, and all of us will be called to act. Now, in her work on Active Hope, Joanna Macy and her team offer a variety of exercises that are designed precisely to move us from identifying our concern for the world, for feeling our pain at the state that the world is in, and imagining something different and then taking an action, translating that concern into imagination and action. Active Hope is all about creating hope through action. And something that I like in these exercises that Joanna Macy and her team sort of provide for people to work through is that in these exercises of moving from concern to action, whatever the process is, there's always a step where she asks us to think about and name an obstacle to whatever action we're considering. Right? If the action is, I'm going to start calling my legislators and say that I want them to move more quickly on moving away from coal, then there's a step in there where she asks you to say, okay, why isn't that going to happen? What's the obstacle for you in making that a reality? Right? Because experience tells us that whenever we try to move forward down a new path, there's that threshold guardian blocking the path. And knowing its name in advance helps us to prepare to overcome it, right? How often in story and myth is naming a monster the key to defeating it? So what are the obstacles we might face in responding to the world's environmental challenges? Well, they're many, they're mundane, and they're real. They might look like, I don't have time to take on one more thing in my life, right? That's very real. I don't have time for one more thing. I don't know anything about writing to legislators. I don't feel competent to do this. There's no grocery stores in my neighborhood to buy all of these fancy and expensive vegan ingredients. I'm not physically able to march or spend long hours at rallies and protests. I can't afford energy upgrades to my home. I don't have transportation to get to organizing events or recycling centers, right? There are real obstacles that we face, and depending on our level of privilege, those obstacles can be significant and entrenched. But just as often, the threshold guardians are emotional and spiritual. The most significant threshold guardian that people face, the one that is most often named, is this one. It's too big. It's too big. I feel overwhelmed at the size of the problems facing us, and I don't believe I can make a difference. I don't believe it. I feel small. I feel like I don't matter. And in the long run, these spiritual obstacles may be more significant because we can figure out practical solutions to practical problems. But without hope, without confidence, without conviction, we may never act to begin with, or we might just burn out. The path is unsustainable. And so Joanna Macy reminds us that the resources the hero needs to complete the journey are not just material, they're spiritual. She says usually some mysterious force is lending a hand. It could be a spiritual presence. It could be the moral force of a value like justice. It could be the witness of the ancestors. It could be the emergent power of an interconnected web of life. Right? Use the force, Luke. When the Buddha touched the earth, he affirmed that all that is interconnected and interdependent. All things, all beings. And this idea of interconnectedness is affirmed by the scientific understanding of the universe, right? By biology and ecology. Shout out to the biology teachers. By indigenous and pagan wisdom that is as old as culture. And it's a core affirmation of Unitarian Universalism as well. Right? It's our seventh principle, respect for the interdependent web of existence of which we are a part. So the Buddha calls the earth to witness to his enlightenment because there is no enlightenment separate from other living things. There is no path away from suffering and into compassion and joy separate from other things. We are the grounds and conditions for each other's awakening. And so the earth and all living things are the grounds and conditions of our awakening. And modern eco-Buddhists see in the Buddha's gesture of touching the earth an invitation to ground ourselves in the emergent power of the earth to access balance and resilience. John McElwain of the Garrison Institute says, ungrounded, we become lost, angry, ineffective. When grounded, however, and connected to nature and connected to the earth, we're connected to the sources of life within us, around us, and to our deepest wisdom. When we are grounded, when we are connected, when we are committed, the forces of life naturally gather around us, and we begin to attract others to our side. Because here's the other thing. In the hero's journey of myth, the hero's position always seems untenable at the start because the hero begins alone. The hero is one person, outnumbered, outmatched, with wildly greater forces arrayed against them. So the hero's chief attribute in the beginning is just this kind of courage to continue moving forward anyway, despite the odds, driven by their commitment, driven by that sense of purpose to something larger than themselves. They keep choosing again and again to keep moving forward. They carry hope with them. And along the way, the hero begins to discover their unique gifts and talents, but more importantly, they pick up companions along the way, each with their unique gifts and talents. Our Western tradition tends to focus on the individual in the hero's journey, to think of it as the story of an individual, but in reality, it is always the story of a group of people working together towards a goal. So the other question that we are invited to ask when we think about a course of action or a life change that we might make is, who are the people who will support me in this goal? And who are the people I will be journeying with in doing this work? There's a moment in the story of the Buddha before he ever got to the Bodhi tree, before he was on his way to the path of enlightenment. The Buddha has gone down a fruitless path of denying the body to achieve enlightenment, right? He is exploring this path of like extreme religious asceticism, which was popular with some of the wandering holy men of his day. And he is fasting alone in the desert, trying to deny the body and rise to a higher consciousness. And so extreme is his practice that he nearly dies. And a young woman named Sujata finds him alone, and she offers him a bowl of rice. And this simple act of kindness and generosity from a total stranger saves the Buddha's life, and it moves him down a new path, the one that would ultimately lead to enlightenment. We need each other. Without that simple act from that simple young woman, the Buddha would not exist. When the Buddha commits to taking his individual gift of enlightenment and turning it toward the healing of the world, the first thing he does is begin to gather a community around him. And so one of the three refuges of Buddhism is the Sangha, the word for religious community. And Buddhists may repeat to themselves as a reminder of their vow of commitment, I take refuge in the Sangha, meaning whatever journey we are on, we are not meant to journey alone. And so speaking of journeying together, I want to lift up a few ways you can do that as Unitarian Universalists and as members of our UUI community. So today at 4 p.m., the National UU The Vote campaign kicks off. This is a nonpartisan campaign to bring together thousands of Unitarian Universalists from all around the country to organize, to strategize, to train, and to support one another in making sure that UU values are heard and supported and are part of the national conversation around the upcoming elections. This is a time when LGBTQ people are under attack. That is not too strong a word. They are under attack. This is a time when reproductive rights are under attack. This is a time when time itself is our most precious commodity in dealing with our spiraling climate crisis, and time is running out. And our UU values need to be lifted up more than ever. Our principles affirm the inherent worth and dignity of all people. They call us to create a world of equity and justice, and they call us to care for our earth and all living things. And our present reality seems so far from those principles, so far from the world we dream of, and powerful forces are pushing us further and further away, and this is always how it is at the beginning of the hero's journey. But we don't have to journey alone. So you can connect to the UU Vote kickoff today, or you can look for our Agents of Change team to keep our community connected to that work as it unfolds, and you can join it then. Similarly, I want to lift up the UUI Green team because they are doing stellar work at UUI and in the wider community promoting sustainable practices. So just as one example, on April 19th, UUI member Joanna Evans is going to be giving a special presentation on plant-based eating on Zoom. At the end of the month, there's going to be a screening of the inspiring documentary Youth versus Government, a climate change superhero movie. And meanwhile, the UUI Thriving Faith Communities team is working to transform our campus, this campus, so we can meet the Paris Pledge and be carbon neutral. And they're helping other faith communities in Indianapolis achieve the same goal. I just heard from Mr. Ray Wilson that 8 to 10 other religious communities have joined in on that work and are taking that pledge. And they would welcome even more volunteers to join in that work. Here and in the community, Ray said, I want to be an evangelist for sustainability. I want to be a missionary for sustainability. I'm like, yes, go Ray Wilson. But we need more people to do that. So be a part of it. And we don't have to journey alone. The changes we're called on to make are significant and they are challenging. But we don't need to meet them alone either as UUs or as members of UUI. There are communities of support where we can learn together, encourage each other, support each other, nurture and grow our individual gifts and talents, and build our collective power. And there are so many more communities just like this one doing the same, and we can connect with each other. And this is how you build a movement. And this is how we become a part of what Joanna Macy calls the Great Turning, the beginning of a new story for our planet and for our lives. When he called the earth to be his witness, the Buddha affirmed that the path out of suffering and destruction is not apart from life, it is emergent from life. the wisdom, the compassion, the kindness, the courage that we need to emerge out of our destructive ways. These powers are our natural inheritance. We find them within our own human nature. Life has given us what we need for growth, for transformation, if we will have the courage to claim these most precious natural resources as our own. And perhaps today, we who seek to find a new way will call the earth to witness to our own growing collective strength, to the depth of our conviction, to our capacity to create hope together, to create hope together. And when we as individuals are on the edge of losing that hope, when the life-stealing and death-dealing forces of fear and temptation and doubt and distraction threaten to knock us off course, when the demon Mara whispers in our ear that we are too small, too few, and asks that fatal question, who are you to save the world? Perhaps we will touch our hand to the earth, remember our strength, remember that we are not alone, and say, the earth is my witness. It is I. Blessed be, and amen.